Hi, everyone. I'm Stephanie King. I'm a writer and education activist living in Philadelphia, and I write fiction of all lengths. My shortest story is 100 words, and my longest was 100,000 words. So, what I'm here to talk about today is how to bite size your novel. What I found is, like all of us, I had a really busy life, and I had a real issue with trying to fit my writing into my life. And at the same time, I found that the writing that I was doing was trying to shove into that time instead of using that time. So, what I'm going to talk about today is how you can kind of make those two things fit together seamlessly by planning your writing plan to fit into your writing commitment. So, this is Bite Size Your Novel. So, one of the things that they tell you when you're trying to plan a writing career is that you need to learn how to manage your productivity. And there are all these productivity books out there, like the Pomodoro Method is the example that I always love to make fun of, that will tell you how you can be more productive. And spoiler alert, I'm going to tell you the entire secret of the Pomodoro Method. You go and you get a timer and you set it for 50 minutes, and then you go and do the thing for 50 minutes. And then when the timer rings, you stop, you take a 5-minute break, and then you do it again. If you're not done, you set the timer again. That man has a best-selling book for that. So the next time somebody tells you that you can't write a best-selling book, you tell them about the Pomodoro guy. But the point that you can take away from that book is the same thing that makes people tell you that you need to write every day. You need to make a commitment, you stick with it, and you follow through with it. So let me tell you a little bit about my story. I did the thing where I got out Microsoft Excel and I figured out how many pages I would have to write a day in order to write a novel by the end of the summer. I had an idea, I knew I wanted to do it, and the answer was 3 pages a day. So I started with a little teeny outline of some things I wanted to do. I went and I posted on Facebook for accountability, told all my friends I was going to write a novel, and then I went and I wrote my 3 pages a day. And by the end of the summer, I had done it. I had written a whole bunch of chapters that were all mysteriously around 21 pages long for a total of almost 300 pages. You'll notice that 21 pages is 3 pages a day for a week. What a coincidence. So, anyway, I got to thinking about this and how most people, when they decide they are going to write a novel, they go and they start at the beginning, they have an idea of what they want to write. They start at the beginning and they just keep writing in a straight line until they've written enough words and gotten to the point that they think is supposed to be the end, and then they stop. It's a very linear process. And so if you don't manage to write for that day, you feel like maybe you failed, or if you get to a part of the story that's a little boggy, you just keep writing even though maybe that part's not that great, but you think, whatever, I'm going to go back and I'll fix it when I'm editing. What I want to encourage you to do is to think about your way of writing in a totally different way where you fit your work into your life and vice versa. So I'm going to like straight up from the beginning tell you the secret that's here on this slide. So first of all, plan your work in components. So don't just say, okay, it's going to be the whole life of this character. Say to yourself instead, okay, what are the parts of my character's life that I want to hit? I'm going to think of each of those parts, and maybe each one is a chapter, or maybe each one is just a scene, but make yourself the shortest outline that you need to have these pieces that you'll be able to fit together. The next step is to fit it into your writing commitment. Figure out how much time you are able to devote to your writing, and then make your component be that size. If you can only write for 20 minutes while you're on the train and you're commuting to work in the morning, then that's your writing commitment. your components need to be however much you can write in those 20 minutes. So maybe your novel is something like 365 flash fiction pieces that add up to a whole novel. That's fine. You've taken your commitment and you have figured out components that work with that. If you're somebody who has a very stressful job and you're only able to work on the weekends, but you know that from Friday night at 5 p.m. until Sunday at midnight, you can just hole up in your room and just blast those words out, then that's your writing commitment. Then you say to yourself, I'm going to write however many words that is, maybe that's 30 to 40 pages. Figure out 30 to 40 page chunks of what you want to do, and those are your components. So it doesn't necessarily matter if you're only able to give a little bit or a lot. It doesn't necessarily matter how many ideas you have that you're trying to stuff into the suitcase of your work. You are going to figure out what those components are that you can break the work down that fits into the writing commitment. And then build it up from whatever the smallest blocks are. Like I said, if it's 20 minutes, figure out 320-minute blocks. If it's 50 pages, then those smallest blocks are pretty big. The point is that whatever the amount is, building it up will leave you with a novel at the end. So what can these blocks be made out of? There are a couple of different ways for you to break down your work and to separate it out into components. So one example is character-based. Stories like Game of Thrones, where each chapter goes through and visits a different character and a different character's perspective. So in this example, if you're writing a family drama, you might pick to have your components move from character to character, visiting the mother, the father, the daughter, the black sheep of the family, maybe a grandmother, but you move around by character, and each component is whatever that character happens to be doing at that particular point in time. That gives you a lot of different perspectives, and it also gives you the opportunity to maybe switch to a different character when you're feeling tired of whichever one you just finished working on. You might choose to break down your components chronologically. If you're writing something that takes place over a very long period of time, you might, instead of having all of the boring years, you might choose to select a certain number of years, certain slices out of when your saga is occurring, and just visit those years. When you think back on your life, not every year is exciting, right? Maybe the year you were 19 was really great, but the year you were 23, absolutely nothing happened. Think of it that way too. You're going to skip over the boring time periods and just focus your components on the ones that are interesting, that have something exciting. Anything else that happens in those missing years, you can refer to it in passing, you can maybe have a flashback, but you can just focus on the slices that actually matter to your narrative. So in the example that I'm giving here, if you're following a family, let's say, for a long time, you might just pick the years where marriages happen, where births happen, where immigration happens, where something of a really significant matter to your characters happens, or when something really significant in world history or in the history of whatever culture you're writing about happens. But again, you get to move around, fast forward, and go back and forth in time just to hit the interesting parts. And jumping around chronologically doesn't have to happen over a huge number of years either. It can happen in a story that takes place over a relatively stable period of time, a few months, a few years. It doesn't necessarily have to be a huge sweeping time saga for you to use that kind of chronological slice as your component. what I've put up here is a very typical kind of romance, um, romance plot line, right? Two people meet, they fall in love, something doesn't work out, and then it's too late, she marries the other guy. Again, that's totally typical, and you could, if you wanted to, write this story that's in front of you in 6 components that happen in this order. But there's no rule that number 1, you have to write them in that order, or number 2, that they have to take place in that order in the narrative. When I wrote this timeline, it happened like this. It started with the realizing it's too late. But the great part about planning your work in components like this is that you can write any of the components at any time and move them around. We all have some kind of word processing software. We're not scratching this on a roll of parchment. So you can write whichever component the inspiration moves you to write on a given day, and then move it around as necessary, either to fit into the chronological timeline that you've created, or just to mix it up narratively because all of a sudden you've decided that scene is cool and should be at the beginning. You're freed from needing to keep that kind of linear timeline if you just start when they're young and write the book until they're old. It frees you both narratively and for your writing process. Another way that you might think about planning your components is geographically. If your story has something to do with some kind of trip, a hero's journey, either literally or figuratively, you might choose the episodes and the interactions on that trip as your driving force of your narrative and as the selections for your components. A good example of this is Lord of the Rings. You know, you have a group of guys, well, hobbits, and they go places. I mean, if you made an outline for Lord of the Rings, a lot of it is first they go here, then they go here, then they go to this next place and meet these people, then they go to this next place and meet these new people. So you could also think about your journey literally as a journey. You plan the components by which place they happen to be at each checkpoint of the story, and you picture your components as that place. You're doing the world building in that place, you're introducing the characters in that place, you're focusing on that place, and then when they leave that place, it's on to the next component of your work. So your plan, your outline for a work like that might just literally be a map where you say, okay, here are checkpoints 1, 2, and 3. They start out in their homeland, then they're on their journey, then they arrive at their destination. And each of your components can just be one of their interactions along the way. So what I want you to do now is to think about the plot you're envisioning for the novel that you want to write. And answer the question, what happens? And what I want you to do is to take just a few minutes and think about what the major inciting incidents of your novel are. What if you were turning to a partner and explaining to them in only 2 minutes, kind of like your elevator pitch, of the things that happen in your book? What would they be? What would be the biggest things that you need to get across in that short of a period of time? Okay, so what you should have now is you should have 3 to 6 big events that occur in your book. And those are your largest overarching umbrella components of your work. You know that those things that you just noted down in your 2 minutes are the things that absolutely have to happen. And yes, there's going to be little things that lead up to it and little things that happen after it, and fallout and emotion and themes and assorted drama. But those are the big signposts that you know you need to start assigning certain weight and certain components to making those things happen that you wrote down. So let's talk about scenes. How many times have you written a scene in a story or in a novel where there are two people having a drink or having lunch and they're just talking to each other because you need to impart a certain amount of information into the narrative, right? We know show don't tell, but we somehow still want to get that information out there, so we kind of try to sneak it in a little bit. And one of the problems with writing in a more linear fashion is that you start talking and you just keep talking. Those scenes they just go on for kind of as long as you need them to in order to get out however much of that information you needed to impart. And so another thing that planning your work in components can help you to do is that because you have fit it into a certain amount of writing time for the day or for the weekend or whatever the commitment is, you can say to yourself, okay, today I am going to write just one scene. I'm not going to write all of that fluff that happens before it or the fluff that happens after it. I'm going to write a fluffless scene that only focuses on the things I really need it to. And then you do that and then you stop, because again, your goal is not necessarily a certain word goal or to just keep going until you can do the next thing, but to get that one component, however big it is, and then you're going to put it where it goes. So you can keep it tight and you can keep it focused on the work that it's supposed to be doing in the story. So I'm going to show you a scene. It happens to be from The Matrix, which is not a novel, but I really like it because it does the job of introducing two characters to each other in a way that doesn't do that stuff that I just talked about.
Yeah. Sure. I'll go.
Hello, Neo.
How do you know that name?
I know a lot about you.
Who are you?
My name is Trinity.
Trinity. The Trinity? That cracked the IRSD base.
That was a long time ago.
Jesus.
What?
I just thought, you were a guy.
Most guys do.
That was you on my computer. How did you do that?
Right now, all I can tell you is that you're in danger. I brought you here to warn you.
What?
They're watching you, Neo.
Who is?
Please just listen. I know why you're here, Neo. I know what you've been doing. I know why you hardly sleep, why you live alone, and why night after night you sit at your computer. You're looking for him. I know, because I was once looking for the same thing. And when he found me, he told me I wasn't really looking for him. I was looking for an answer. It's the question that drives us, Neo. It's the question that brought you here. You know the question, just as I did.
What is the Matrix?
The answer is out there, Neo. It's looking for you. And it will find you if you want it to.
So what I really like about this scene is that it doesn't go through all of that setup that you sometimes feel like you need to do in a scene. You know, hi, I'm Trinity, now we shake hands. It doesn't waste its time with that. It doesn't waste its time with a whole bunch of backstory about her life, about Morpheus's life. It is very, very pared down to just getting the work done that needs to be done in the scene where these two people meet each other. And so that's what I like about thinking about your work as components, is that you don't need that other stuff. You can trust each individual scene to do the work and bear that weight. I think sometimes we don't trust our readers enough as readers to get the hints that we put there for them. And I think we don't trust ourselves enough as writers to start and stop with a hard start and stop like movie scenes do. And that's one thing that I do think that planning out your work that way can give to your scenes as well as your outline. So now I know you're thinking, well, what about theme? Everybody tells me that my work has to have some big overarching theme or else it's not meaningful and I won't win the Pulitzer Prize. And so I'm here to tell you that yes, your work does really need to have some kind of theme, but that can come later. Theme can be the mortar between the bricks of your components. You should know what your themes are going to be, and you should be leaving the breadcrumbs along the trail as you're writing, but you don't necessarily need to be creating your deep philosophical meaning while you're getting your first draft out. You can put the blocks together and then say, okay, what is this shaping up to be? What am I building with these bricks? And where can I make the theme out of it? And sometimes you'll surprise yourself as a writer, when you have these pieces that you put together, you might start to see a pattern that you didn't even realize you were putting there before. Or you might realize that as you look at the pattern, you kind of need more bricks to fill in there, or maybe you need like a little gargoyle or something to liven things up. And then you realize that your theme needs to do something else than maybe you planned it to at the beginning. If you are heavy on theme from the beginning, if your main character is a priest or a philosopher who's spending the whole time, the plot is them philosophizing on the meaning of life, that's one thing. But for the most part, novels are driven by plot and then supported underneath by character. So don't be afraid to go back and put the theme in more as you're assembling your parts. So what I want you to do now is I want you to take a minute and I want you to think about what the themes of your work are going to be. So you spend a couple of minutes writing down things that have to happen. They clone the dinosaurs, but now here is where I want you to think about, what do you want your work to say? What is your nature finds a way? And take 1 minute and try to write down 3 or 4 things that you really want the theme of your work to address. So now you have some ideas about what you want to happen in your book, literally, in terms of plot, and what you want to happen thematically. What's the deeper soul of your book? And those two things will come together to create the meaning of your work. So, what you should be taking away from this is overarchingly, you've got an idea for a book. Congratulations, you have a novel you want to write, or you wouldn't have bothered watching this. The next step is to figure out how you're going to write that book. And you're going to break that idea down. You've got your 5 or 6 things that you want to have happen, and you're going to break that down into some components. They may be what you think of as chapters. They may be what you think of as scenes. They might be what you think of as individual pages. But you've broken it down into some kind of smaller pieces that you can put back together and make a sum of the parts. You've got some themes that you want to address. Knowing that those themes are lurking underneath, they're going to seep into your components as you write them. And you also need to make your writing commitment. And don't lie to yourself, but be aggressive. Pick a writing commitment that will get you to a novel at the end of it. If it's only 1 page a day, that's fine. In 365 days, you will have a 365-page novel, which is too long, probably. But that's okay too. If your commitment is only 20 minutes a day, then it'll just be however many words you can write in the 20 minutes, and you don't need to beat yourself up about it. You'll still come out with a novel's worth of words at the end. The point is, you're going to make some kind of commitment. You're going to pick some kind of amount of time or some kind of word count, and you're going to say that you will do it. And then you're going to look at your components and see how far you can break them down into the smallest possible piece that fits into your writing commitment. Then you can plan your work so that your components fit into your commitment, and you write your novel block by block, 1 block at a time. Because you don't want to bite off more than you can chew. You want to make your writing commitment bite-sized. Thank you. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed Bite Size Your Novel. I hope that you have an idea now about not only what you want to write, but how you're going to write it. I think one of the mistakes that writers make is they try to shove their writing commitment onto their writing instead of making those two things work together. And hopefully, now that we've had this little talk, you'll have some idea how to make those things more of a relationship that works together and leaves you with a novel at the end. I hope you'll let me know how it goes. Thanks a lot and enjoy the rest of WriteHive.